Before we get into today's video, please quickly check below to see if you've subscribed. It's totally free and allows you to never miss one of our videos. Constructed on the Inudelian homeworld of Andria, and meticulously maintained through countless eras by the same species, the Galactic database was a network of aging computers safeguarded from cosmic radiation in a vast underground facility. It held vast archives about the galaxy's history, the Federation, and it ensured the safety of every publicly available detail about weapons designs, self-aware species, and even something as specific as Earth's animals. Yet on this day, a newcomer approached Andria's scorching desert from above, a cautious herbivore named Gorto, who knew nothing about such Deathworld creatures. He came to Andria hoping to tap the Galactic database for one purpose only: to find a means of defending his peaceful people from the marauding Deathworlder pirates who preyed upon them. What he could never anticipate was that this harsh planet, with its ancient halls of knowledge and unyielding sand dunes, would offer him far more than the weapons he sought. It would give him a way to protect his people without relying on weapons at all. Unaware of this yet, Gorto's ship descended through Andria's dry skies, the arid ground approaching beneath him. The library that housed the Galactic database was nearing below, a structure representing the deep and ancient knowledge of its desert-dwelling creators. Hewn from the golden sandstone of a colossal mesa, the library rose like a natural outgrowth of the desert. Its facade was an elegant masterpiece, adorned with sweeping geometric patterns and enigmatic glyphs that recounted the Federation's founding and the Inudelians' ancient past. For those whose translators could unravel these symbols, it stood as a portal to knowledge unmatched across the galaxy. For Gorto, it represented far more than just knowledge. It was a beacon of hope against the unrelenting raids that plagued his homeworld, his last hope against the growing threat of Deathworlder pirates. These marauders would raid his homeworld, stealing everything of value, from precious minerals to agricultural produce, and leaving them defenseless. And that was the best-case scenario. In worse encounters, carnivorous species found the Oruzin too appealing to ignore, treating them as little more than exotic prey. Gorto had come to the Galactic database to find weapon designs simple enough for his pacifist kind to use in self-defense. Gorto himself was a good example of his species' vulnerability. His fat, rich frame and sleek, ash-gray fur made him visually distinct, but tragically alluring to predators. His spiral horns, though thick, were little deterrent against those who saw them as trophies. His amber eyes, expressive and intelligent, betrayed the perpetual wariness ingrained in him by countless generations of survival against overwhelming odds. The Oruzin, a recently uplifted species, had evolved without the dexterous limbs that many other sapient species relied upon. Their split hooves and anxious nature limited their ability to craft tools or build independently. Through diplomacy, they had learned to rely on other species for their technology and infrastructure. Even Gorto's spacesuit was no exception, a sleek yet awkwardly tailored garment, designed by others to fit his unique physiology. Inside his ship, Gorto wrestled with the suit. The reinforced fabric clung to his legs as he struggled to put it into place. "Stubborn thing," he muttered, twisting his torso awkwardly to secure the final clasps. The helmet, a transparent dome, fit loosely over his head, but still had space for his spiraling horns. Despite the difficulty, he persevered. He wouldn't dream of leaving the ship without protection. Andria's atmosphere, while technically breathable, was abrasive to most species except the Inudelians who had evolved here. Once his suit was in place, Gorto meticulously checked every seal, every joint, and every sensor. The suit was reliable, but his natural caution drove him to double-check everything. Finally satisfied, he activated the hatch. The door hissed open, revealing Andria's harsh exterior. The heat reflected off his suit as he stepped out onto the dusty ground, his hooves sinking slightly into the fine sand. He took a moment to adjust to the brightness, squinting against the glare. Then he froze. Beside another parked ship, a figure stood motionless, staring directly at him. Its form was tall and angular, its pristine white fur contrasting vividly against Andrea's dunes. The being's forward-facing eyes, sharp like that of a predator, locked onto Gorto, sending a cold shiver down his spine. It was no doubt a Deathworlder. His instincts screamed at him to retreat back into the safety of his ship, but his hooves felt rooted to the ground. The figure tilted its head slightly, studying him with an intensity that felt almost invasive. "Boo!" it shouted. The sharp sound shattered the silence, and Gorto's reaction was immediate and instinctive. His hooves scrabbled against the sand as he wheeled around, his entire body trembling with deep fear. The sudden movement sent him stumbling, his suited form nearly toppling before he found his balance. Without a second thought, he bolted toward the library's entrance, his panicked bleating muffled by his helmet. The distance to the library's threshold seemed endless. His hooves pounded against the sand, each stride driven by pure terror. Only when he reached the carved archway did he dare to look back, his amber eyes wide with fear. The white-furred Deathworlder remained by the ships, making no move to pursue. Still, Gorto could feel those predatory eyes locked onto him, and he quickly ducked inside. Before proceeding, he paused to compose himself, remembering the strict protocols of the library. Despite his panic, he couldn't forget his manners. Gorto vigorously shook his suited form, dislodging any sand that clung to him. The Inudelians were meticulous about maintaining their ancient repository, and tracking desert grit inside would be unforgivably discourteous. As he stepped into the library proper, Gorto's fear momentarily gave way to awe. The interior embodied the very definition of artistry to an extent that defied his already high expectations. Massive columns of sandstone rose into darkness above, their surfaces filled all the way up with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change in the ambient light. Between these pillars, shelves stretched upward until they disappeared into shadow, each one laden with knowledge spanning millennia. Gorto's wonder quickly gave way to his more immediate concerns. His eyes darted around frantically, searching for help. He needed to find an Inudelian, someone who could protect him from the predator outside. His hooves clicked against the polished floor as he moved deeper into the library, each sound echoing off the ancient walls. Then he spotted one, an Inudelian standing near a towering shelf, examining a small holographic display. Relief flooded through Gorto, and he hurried forward, his hooves sliding slightly in his haste. The Inudelian was an imposing figure, though not in the way predators were. Its smooth, golden skin bore the characteristic cracking pattern of its species, resembling the very desert that had shaped their evolution. The being's head was hairless and alien, with small breathing holes where a nose might be on other species. It wore flowing robes of deep blue, the fabric moving like wind with each subtle movement. "Respected keeper," Gorto said, lowering his head in deference, his spiral horns pointing toward the ground. "Please, I beg your assistance. There's a Deathworlder outside, a predator. It tried to startle me, probably testing my reaction speeds before deciding to consume me." The Inudelian turned to face him fully, its brilliant azure eyes studying him with ancient patience. "I am Elthurin," it said, its voice carrying the tone of one who had seen countless ages pass. "Perhaps, young one, we should examine this situation more carefully. Fear can often distort our perceptions. Tell me exactly what transpired." Gorto's words tumbled out in a rush. "I had just landed, seeking knowledge from your great database. But when I exited my ship, I saw it, tall, with white fur and forward-facing eyes, a clear predator. And then it shouted at me. It was obviously trying to gauge my flight response to see if I would make worthy prey. My species is often targeted for our taste, you see, and... Elthurin raised a hand, the gesture somehow gentle and commanding. I understand your duress, the ancient being said, but let us consider this with clarity. Was there any aggressive movement toward you? Any attempt at pursuit? No, Gorto admitted, his hooves shuffling nervously on the polished floor. But surely you understand, respected Elthurin. This was a deliberate attempt to frighten me. What other purpose could such behavior serve? A slight ripple passed through the cracks in Elthurin's skin, an expression Gorto couldn't interpret. I will speak with the Rukal about his behavior, the Inudelian said. Rukal? Gorto's ears twitched at the unfamiliar term. The being you encountered. But for now, proceed deeper into the library. I will deal with the young Rukal. With that, Elthurin glided toward the carnivore at the entrance, his robes flowing like water over stone. Gorto watched the ancient being approaching the Death Worlder before following the suggested path deeper into the library, determined to get away from any potential confrontation. The further he went, the more the architecture seemed mysterious, as if the very walls were alive with accumulated knowledge. He hadn't waited long when another Inudelian approached, moving calmly between the massive data terminals. I am Elkaran, the new being announced. You seek access to the Galactic database. Did your species bring the Federation token? Yes, of course, Gorto responded eagerly, relieved to move past his earlier fright. From a protected compartment in his suit, he withdrew a crystalline disk marked with spiraling patterns, the access key granted to the Orizin upon their acceptance into the Federation. Elkaran's eyes flickered with an intense blue light as he examined the token. Fascinating, the Inudelian said after a moment. You are the first of your kind to visit our archives. What knowledge do you seek? Gorto's ears drooped slightly as he explained. Our worlds are being raided by Deathworlder pirates. They steal our resources and, worse, they hunt us. We need weapons, something we can use to defend ourselves. I know we're not naturally suited for combat, but surely there must be something in your vast archives that could help us. Elkaran's expression softened with understanding, though there was a hint of concern in those brilliant blue eyes. Young one, as an uplifted species that has not yet chosen to modify your physiology for manipulators, your options are limited. Most weapon designs require appendages your people do not possess. Please, Gorto pressed, his voice trembling but determined. I must at least look. This is about our survival. There must be something we could adapt. Elkaran considered for a moment, then nodded. Very well. Follow me. The Nudelian led him to a sleek terminal that seemed to grow organically from the floor. As Gorto approached, the holographic display brightened, text automatically shifting to the flowing script of his native language. Despite his earlier panic, Gorto found himself quickly adapting to the interface. His eyes surveyed the floating symbols as he navigated through various categories, finally reaching a comprehensive list of weapon designs. The first entry caught his attention immediately. AK-47, he read aloud, noting its human origin. A projectile weapon? But this seems primitive. He studied the rotating hologram of the rifle, his ears twitching with interest. Though I suppose simplicity might be an advantage for us. What can you tell me about this design? Primitive? Elkaran's skin rippled with what might have been amusement. That assessment is inaccurate. This design has endured across centuries precisely because of its reliability. It functions in virtually any environment, sand, ice, underwater, and requires minimal maintenance.
Many young Deathworlder species favor it as their first step into advanced weaponry.
Gorto's ears perked up with interest.
Then perhaps this could work for us, if it's so reliable.
He studied the holographic display more closely, watching the weapon's internal mechanisms cycle in the demonstration.
You forget your own physiology,
Elkaran said gently.
This weapon requires fingers for operation, trigger control, and reloading. Moreover, the recoil force would be overwhelming for your species, and the sound alone.
The Inudelian paused meaningfully.
Even with ear protection, the psychological impact on a pacifist species would be significant.
But we need something.
Gorto stamped a hoof in frustration.
Perhaps the humans could modify it for us. We could pay them well. We have resources they value.
It's not just about physical adaptation,
Elkaran explained, his voice carrying centuries of wisdom.
This weapon requires precise aim and, more importantly, the psychological resolve to fire it at another being. Your species, in its current form, lacks both the physical and mental adaptations for such actions. Even with human assistance, I fear this would be beyond your capabilities.
Gorto's ears drooped as he reluctantly acknowledged the truth in these words. His hooves clicked softly against the floor as he scrolled further down the list. Suddenly, his eyes widened.
What about this one? Another human design. The RPG-7?
His voice grew animated.
We could mount these on vehicles. We wouldn't even need to let the pirates land. We could strike their ships from a distance.
Elkaran's expression grew concerned.
You're overlooking several critical factors. Most modern ships, even those used by pirates, have defensive systems specifically designed to counter such weapons. Effective use requires extensive tactical training to overcome these defenses. The user must understand shooting mechanics, targeting systems, and complex evasive patterns.
The Inudelian's eyes pulsed with a deeper blue.
This is not knowledge that can be quickly acquired, especially by a species whose very nature resists violence.
Gorto's enthusiasm deflated. His thoughts turned to his people, to the raids, the terror, the helplessness. Their peaceful nature now felt like a cruel joke played by evolution. How could they survive in a galaxy where so many saw them as nothing more than prey? But determination quickly replaced his despair. Without a word to Elkaran, his hooves moved across the interface, applying specific filters to the weapon's database. He needed something simpler, something that required nothing more than pressing a button, something that pirate ships couldn't easily defend against. The holographic display shifted and flickered as new parameters were applied, the list of weapons reorganizing itself before his eyes. Gorto's ears suddenly perked up as he spotted the first item in the filtered list. His amber eyes widened with growing excitement as he read through the specifications of what appeared to be exactly what he'd been seeking. A human-designed ballistic missile system with atomic warheads.
This is perfect!
His hooves clicked rapidly against the floor in excitement as he scrolled through the technical details.
Look at these specifications. The launch system is entirely automated. It only needs basic input commands. The targeting systems are self-correcting, requiring minimal user intervention. And the payload!
His voice rose with hope.
No pirate ship could defend against this!
The weapon seemed tailor-made for an uplifted species like the Orizon. The interface was simple enough that even their hooves could operate it. The automated systems handled all the complex calculations. Best of all, it required no direct confrontation. They could launch from safe distances, protected within bunkers.
Elkaran, this is exactly what we need. We could establish a defensive perimeter around our worlds. The pirates would never dare to.
Stop!
Elkaran's voice cut through Gorto's enthusiasm like a blade. The Nudelian's skin had darkened considerably, the dark cracks appearing deeper, more pronounced.
You speak of atomic weapons with the naive enthusiasm of one who has never witnessed their consequences.
The ancient being's eyes brightened with an intensity Gorto hadn't seen before.
Consider, young one, what you propose. These weapons don't simply destroy ships. They poison everything they touch and heat the atmosphere. The radioactive fallout would contaminate your worlds for generations. The electromagnetic pulse would disable the very technology your species depends upon. Even a successful defense would leave your people's habitats uninhabitable.
Alcaran began to pace, his robe swirling with each turn.
And what of the political consequences? Your allies would abandon you. The pacifists of the very federation that uplifted you would turn its back. No peaceful species can maintain diplomatic relations with one that employs atomic weapons. You would be isolated, marked as dangerous, and isolation, for a species like yours that depends on interstellar trade and cooperation, is a death sentence.
With each word, Gorto's ears drooped lower, his initial excitement crumbling into ash.
You are right,
he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper.
I was foolish. Besides, the humans would never agree to sell us such weapons anyway.
Alcaran's expression shifted again, this time to something almost like pity.
There, young one, you are wrong again. The humans might very well provide you with these weapons if you appealed to their protective instincts. If you told them of your people being hunted as prey and eaten alive.
The Nudelian paused, choosing his next words carefully.
Humanity is remarkable in many ways. They have a strong tendency to protect those they see as vulnerable, but they often lack the wisdom to see beyond immediate solutions. Their history is filled with instances of providing powerful weapons to those they wished to protect, only to watch those same weapons bring devastation to their allies.
Alcaran gestured to the surrounding archives.
This is why the Galactic database has extensive protocols regarding human technology. Their creations are brilliant, yes, but often devastating in their implications. They solve immediate problems while creating far greater ones. It is why we Inudelians carefully curate access to their designs, especially for younger and violent species.
Perhaps we should look beyond human designs,
Gorto said quietly, his voice filled with sadness as his hooves moved across the interface once more. He began filtering for non-human weapons, his ears perking up briefly at the sight of an elegant laser blaster.
The Vermidians?
Alcaran shook his head before Gorto could even ask.
They would never modify their designs for another species. Their pride in their engineering is absolute.
Gorto's shoulders slumped, his head dropping low.
Then perhaps this is our fate, to forever be prey, to be eaten until nothing remains of us.
Not necessarily.
Alcaran's tone shifted, taking on the patient cadence of a teacher who had just remembered something important.
There might be a solution you haven't considered, if you're willing to listen.
At this point,
Gorto said with a bitter laugh,
what do I have to lose?
Alcaran's long fingers moved across the terminal as his gaze focused. The holographic display flickered, and a new list appeared. But what Gorto saw made him take a step back in surprise. There were many items listed, and they were indeed classified as weapons in the database. But they weren't machines or devices. They were living creatures. His eyes widened as he read some of the names. Cane Corso, beehives, and geese.
I don't understand,
Gorto stammered, shifting his weight nervously from hoof to hoof.
These are animals? Earth's animals? But why are they listed as weapons?
Elkaran placed a comforting hand on Gorto's shoulder, the touch gentle but firm.
I can provide you with a detailed plan to acquire these, let's call them defensive assets. But you must listen carefully to my warnings first. Running to Earth without proper preparation could be disastrous, both for your safety and for diplomatic relations with humanity.
The strangeness of the situation should have given Gorto pause, but the tiny spark of hope that had ignited in his chest pushed all other concerns aside.
I'll listen to everything you have to say,
he promised eagerly.
Good.
Elkaran's eyes pulsed with a knowing light.
You see, certain Deathworlder creatures can be more effective than any manufactured weapon, even more so for pacifists like the Orozin. But this requires extreme care and intelligence. The challenge is twofold. First, to avoid having your weapons turn on you, and second, to approach this in a way that won't offend humanity. They can be particularly protective about their companion species, and by protective, I mean civilization-ending protective.
The ancient librarian's expression grew more serious.
Knowing these risks, do you still wish to hear my plan?
I want to hear everything,
Gorto said firmly, and immediately found himself swept into a torrent of information that made his head spin. Elkaran began with warnings about the Cane Corso, and they were particularly overwhelming to Gorto. The ancient librarian spoke at length about proper care, respect, and the sacred bond between humans and their companion species. His voice grew stern as he emphasized that these creatures were not to be treated as tools, but partners, and any attempt to treat them otherwise would lead to disaster. When Gorto touched on the subject of genetic engineering, Elkaran's skin darkened to an almost bronze shade.
To alter their nature would be an atrocity and an offense to the humans,
Elkaran declared.
Better to accept extinction than to commit such a violation. These beings must be respected for what they are, not transformed into what you wish them to be.
Gorto nodded repeatedly, his ears flicking back and forth as he absorbed each warning. As the minutes passed, he noticed Elkaran's posture gradually relaxing, the ancient being's tone shifting from cautionary to instructional. The actual plan, when it finally emerged, was not what Gorto had expected.
Phase 1,
Elkaran explained,
is to approach humans and say that you want to buy their pets, and convince them you will take care of it. Simply express interest in their companion animals to protect your farms, and in the bees as honey producers.
But
Gorto's confusion was evident in his twitching ears.
Wouldn't it be faster to tell them about the pirates? Surely they would help, considering all you said.
That is precisely what you must avoid,
Elkaran cut in.
Your species must learn self-reliance, at least for the small threats. Outside protection would only perpetuate your vulnerability. This way, you gain not just defenders, but the confidence to stand on your own hooves and the chance to slowly improve yourselves.
The instructions continued to flow. Elkaran was adamant about establishing trade routes specifically for dog food.
Don't attempt to produce it yourselves. The stress would be counterproductive for an herbivore species.
Phase 3, Elkaran explained, would require the Orozin to spend time on Earth, learning directly from human handlers. As the Inudelian spoke, Gorto could almost see the future unfolding before him, his people growing stronger, more confident, no longer easy prey for pirates. Finally, Elkaran's tone softened.
Return to us one day, young one. I look forward to updating the Orozin's entry in our database. From vulnerable species that likely won't survive the century to something far more interesting.
The ancient being's eyes pulsed with a gentle blue light.
Now go. Your path to strength begins on Earth, not here. Take the coordinates and leave.
Gorto bowed deeply, his spiral horns pointing toward the ground in respect. As he turned to leave, the sounds of pages turning in the library seemed to whisper about hope of a future where his people would no longer live in fear, even if that meant he would have to gather a diplomatic team and send them on a scary trip to Earth first. Half a local year had passed since Gorto's visit to the Galactic database on Andrea. Life on Gapus had changed subtly but significantly in that time, though the world itself remained as it had for centuries, a planet of gentle slopes and endless grasslands, where the afternoon breeze carried the sweet scent of native vegetation. The Orizon settlements were scattered sparsely across the landscape, modest clusters of wooden structures that seemed to fuse with the hills. Gorto was resting in the shadow of his home when the peaceful scene shattered as the village bells began to toll. Their resonant warning was quickly followed by the radar keeper's frantic cries.
"Pirates! Ship detected! Everyone to your suits!"
Chaos erupted immediately. The natural instincts of a prey species took hold, and the Orizon began to scatter in panic. Their hooves thundered against the ground as they threatened to break into a full stampede. The assigned village leaders struggled to maintain order, their voices nearly lost in the growing tumult.
"Stop!"
Gorto's voice cut through the panic as he rushed to join the organization team.
"Remember our training! Going back to quadruped behavior will only make us more vulnerable."
He moved among his people, his voice steady despite his racing heart.
"Put on your suits and proceed to the beehives! We've prepared for this!"
The leadership team spread out, their voices joining Gorto's. Slowly, reason began to overcome instinct. The sight of their fellows maintaining composure helped calm the more panicked individuals. Within minutes, the chaos transformed into purposeful movement as the Orizon collectively donned their protective suits. Gorto moved quickly between the organized lines of his kind, now all properly suited and making their way to the defensive positions near the beehives. His amber eyes darted back and forth, checking and double-checking every detail.
"Are all the valuables secured in the vault?"
he called out to the security team.
"Everything's in place,"
came the response from one of the leaders.
"The vault is sealed and the hives are ready."
A collective gasp rose from the gathered Orizon as a dark shape cut through the clouds above. The pirates' ship's approach was familiar. They'd seen this same trajectory many times before. It was headed directly for the vault, just as they'd predicted, just as they'd planned for. The ship's shadow fell across the settlement like an old nightmare, but this time, something was different. The Orizon weren't running. They weren't hiding. They stood their ground, arranged in tight formations around their hives, their suited forms ready for the oncoming confrontation. Gorto's ears twitched inside his helmet as he watched the ship begin its landing sequence. Everything was in position. Now they would see if Elkaran's wisdom would prove as valuable as the weapons they'd originally sought. At least 20 Ixars emerged from the ship's landing ramp, their appearance sending waves of terror through the gathered Orizon. Each reptilian was covered in segmented armor that wrapped around their muscular frames like metallic scales, leaving only their fearsome faces and a small part of their necks exposed. Their eyes were predatory slits, burning with cruel intelligence, and their mouths were filled with rows of teeth that gleamed as they grinned at their intended prey. For most of the Orizon present, these weren't just intimidating warriors, they were the stuff of nightmares made flesh. Only the youngest among them lacked personal memories of Ixar raids, of watching helplessly as their kind were hunted for sport and sustenance.
"Are the whistle teams in position?"
Gorto asked one of the leaders beside him, fighting to keep his voice steady.
"Yes, ready for your signal,"
came the quiet response. The Orizon instinctively pressed closer together as the Ixars approached, their hooves clicking nervously against the ground. The raiders took their time crossing the distance from their ship, their heavy boots crushing the grass beneath them with each step. Their confidence was evident in their relaxed postures and cruel smiles. The largest Ixar, a brutish figure whose armor bore distinctive battle scratches, stepped ahead of his group as they neared the hives. He towered over the Orizon, his throat sac pulsing dreadfully. The others stayed back, spreading out in a loose semicircle with their weapons held casually. Gorto felt his legs trembling as the massive Ixar's shadow approached him. The creature's scales were decorated with metal studs that caught in the sunlight, and scars crossed his face like a map of his past victories.
Well, well,
the Ixar captain rumbled, his translated voice carrying a reptilian hiss.
Why is our food wearing spacesuits in their own world? Have you finally decided to package yourselves for convenient transport?
His subordinates chittered with laughter, their teeth flashing. Stepping forward on shaking hooves, Gorto managed to say,
"It's for protection."
The Ixar's laughter grew louder, their captain raising his heavy blaster rifle.
Protection? From this?
He patted the weapon almost lovingly.
I don't think your little suits will help much.
"They're not to protect us from you,"
Gorto replied, and then shouted, "Hooves!" The Orizon responded instantly, their synchronized stomping creating waves of thunderous vibrations through the hives. The Ixar captain's smile barely had time to fade before his eyes widened in shock. He slapped at his face as the first bee struck him, followed by another and another. Within moments, the air was filled with thousands of angry bees, their Earth-evolved aggression focused entirely on the Ixars, since the Orizon were all wearing spacesuits. The reptilians' reaction was chaos incarnate. Some fired wildly at the swarm with their blasters, the energy bolts passing harmlessly through the cloud of insects. Others threw down their weapons and fled toward their ship, while several dropped and rolled on the ground, their armored bodies offering no protection against the relentless stinging insects that seemed to find the gaps better than any battle drone would. Gorto watched in amazement, barely able to believe the effectiveness of these tiny earth creatures. The mighty Ixars, terror of countless peaceful species, were being routed by insects a fraction of their size. Shaking himself from his stupor, Gorto raised his voice above the chaos.
"Whistle teams, now!"
The whistle teams activated their devices in unison, the high-pitched sound carrying across the village to where the other Orizon teams waited with their canine allies. The noise was louder than the chaos of fleeing Ixars and angry bees, signaling the next phase of their defensive trap. Long moments passed as they watched the mighty raiders either writhing on the ground or attempting to flee back to their ship. But before the retreating Ixars could reach their vessel, another group of Orizon emerged from their concealed positions. These defenders, though clearly terrified, held firm to the leashes of their animal companions. The dogs, in obvious contrast to their handlers' hesitation, were practically vibrating with excitement at the sight of their running targets. What followed was almost absurdly one-sided. The massive black dogs launched themselves forward, their powerful bodies easily overtaking the fleeing raiders. They leaped for arms and exposed necks with great precision, their training showing in every movement. The Orizon watched in stunned silence, not yet daring to celebrate. Near the hives, the bee-stung raiders had stopped moving entirely, while those captured by the dogs near the ship were calling out their surrender. Their captors, clutching the leashes, remained frozen in instinctive fear, barely able to process the victory unfolding before them. Eventually, the last of the Ixars stopped struggling, and the Orizon slowly began to overcome their fear. They worked together to keep the dogs from approaching bees, their months of training finally paying off. The victory had earned them not just their immediate safety, but a captured ship and an arsenal of advanced weapons. though most agreed they preferred their current defensive strategy. Over the following years, the Orizon refined their tactics. They learned to better coordinate with their Earth-born allies, developing strategies that leveraged their strengths. While they never became true warriors, they learned how to avoid being easily overpowered by smaller forces, and their reputation shifted from easy prey to not worth the trouble, a status that suited them perfectly. The Galactic database would one day be updated with a new entry about the Orizon, confirming that for them, Earth's animals were indeed the best weapons.
I hope you enjoyed that story. Click right here to watch another video with the same characters.